Hi, and welcome to Lesson 5 of Module 1, beginning with the affective domain. How do you feel about having in your back pocket techniques you can use to strengthen the affective domain, even in the face of 9, count them 9, of the most common emotional triggers? In only 4 lessons, you have come so far, and you deserve congratulations on your perseverance in digging in deep to each of these lessons through the scaffolds, the activities, and the formative assessments. Are you seeing how they all play vital parts in deepening the concept of the affective domain for you and how to strengthen it? When you begin using these techniques in your learning environment, you're going to see a huge change in the attitude of your students. They're going to be looking you in the eye more often, and a lot of teachers tell me that their students become more helpful to the teacher and to the other students. That is the magic of a strong affective domain. And in this course, you are getting the keys to the magic kingdom. So let's keep going. We have 6 more lessons in this module, and each of them is packed with tools you can use to strengthen the affective domain from all sides. Our end result is that by focusing on the base first, emotions, your phenomenon-based learning projects, or any other lessons you're going to be giving are going to be really powerful. You're setting up the scene for a really engaging work of art in the form of educational ventures. So, if you remember in Lesson 4, we began looking at norms and consequences. In this lesson, we're going to go even deeper because I'm going to give you concrete ways for you to carry out those norms and consequences with positive reinforcement. And because this topic is so important, and I'm providing you with so much information, I've divided this lesson not into 2 parts, but into 3 to make it easier to assimilate. You'll also find a lot of information in the folder for even more tools that you can use and tips on how to enforce the norms and consequences positively, always positively. I don't believe in raising my voice in the classroom. I used to. I weaned myself away from it because it was unhealthy for everyone. It was my journey in changing the paradigm in my classroom, and that's what I'm going to share with you because I was there. I had to work at changing it, and I did. So that's what this lesson is all about. Before I give you that story, let's do a quick review of the last lesson to make sure that we're all standing on a solid platform before we jump up to a new lesson. First image. If you're standing in front of the room and talking to your students, how does that cause irritability? I'm just going to pause and let you think about it for a few seconds. If you've been saying to yourself, because if my students are talked at all day, they end up feeling as though they're extraneous in the classroom instead of partners in their own learning. So if I include them in as many aspects of their own learning as possible and create activities in which they are encouraged to explore and process new information, then they feel valued and respected and their irritability disappears. If that's what you were thinking, then you really got the whole first half of the last lesson. It's an excellent formative assessment for both of us. Second image. What does a treasure chest have to do with apathy? I'm going to pause again for a few seconds while you think about it. Doom, 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 doom. If you've been saying to yourself, the treasure chest activates students' interest because through it, students are given a choice at some point of the day or various points of the day to choose their own learning activity, then you really remember the key points of that emotional trigger. And you're going to find so few students suffering from apathy and more excited about the way the day plays out in your classroom because now you have a technique to empower your students. Apathy disappears. Third image, the last of the 9 most common emotional triggers, insecurity. Shall I give you a moment to remember which techniques you can use to vanquish insecurity, or do you already have it? If you're saying to yourself, when we co-create the norms and consequences of the class with them, and we ask our students to commit to them by signing them, and we even strengthen the collective efficacy by involving their guardians to sign them, okay, well, I just added collective efficacy into the equation. Please forgive me, but collective efficacy is an element that is so important, and you're going to find out more about it in just a few seconds. So in the meantime, let's go on. And we repeat the norms and consequences often, and just one more part, we follow through with both the norms and the consequences as unilaterally as possible. We are generating an overall feeling for our students and for ourselves, for that matter, of security in our own learning environment. You nailed it. And how was that as a powerful review of the last lesson? So now let's deepen the experience of being successful with norms and consequences. So in the end, you're paving the way for phenomenal-based learning projects. Let's go. Same drill as before. The time spent on the scaffold for this lesson is very valuable, just like the scaffolds you'll create for your students during the course of the projects. You're going to be presented in this lesson with so much information that the beginning of the concept of effect sizes before we talk about them together will be really valuable for you. So go ahead and open that document in the folder and we'll go over the concept together when you're finished. I'll be here waiting for you. Are there any objectives for this module that you've thought of that we haven't addressed yet? Have you looked at the index to see if we're gonna focus on it? If not, please send me a message or bring it up in the community meetings and I'll see if I can include it. Co-creation. There are two objectives for this lesson. The first is to look at the most reliable educational studies to date, and hopefully you've done the scaffolding activity because it introduces these studies. They give us more information about how effective our educational practices are or aren't, and also show definitively the importance of establishing a concrete structure of appropriate behavior. In other words, norms and consequences, but through positive discipline. The key here is the word and concept positive. What you're thinking? I don't have to raise my voice so my students hear me? I don't have to use the word no as often as possible so my students know what not to do? Well, no, you don't. And that's hopefully the last time I'll use the negative in this lesson. This lesson is all about the positive. You tell me if I get this right and if I model exactly what I am professing to be the foundation of this very lesson. The difference between positive discipline and positive reinforcement is really very subtle, so it's worth noting because I'm going to use the term positive discipline in this first part and then positive reinforcement in the rest of the lesson for one important reason. And you tell me if you agree with the distinction by the end of this lesson, okay? You began this in the scaffold, studying what this chart means. Now I'll clarify it, and you'll probably see that you understood it pretty well, and also that having that opportunity to think about it by yourself, quietly, slowly, you now feel more secure and patient with yourself and the concept. So I'm beginning with these studies, with Hattie's studies, because if I want you to be convinced of the importance of discipline in the learning environment, through the most reliable studies to date about educational practices, I need to just spend a couple of minutes showing you what they mean, all right? This is going to be painless. John Hattie is a name that's very highly regarded in the educational world today. He and his team have spent the last 30 years and counting synthesizing the educational practices we use or don't use in the classroom. The team has analyzed them using a scale that's most common in business and in math studies called effect sizes, but they found them to work really well in their educational conclusions. We don't need to understand all their analytics and calculations. The only part of this effect size chart that we really need to understand to be stronger educators is the implication of the hinge point. And after that, everything becomes clear. Of the 252 different techniques and influences on learning that Hattie and his team have analyzed using hundreds of thousands of studies, they've determined the hinge point is 0.4. What in the world does that mean? All right, stay with me because it's actually very simple. If an educational practice is analyzed and determined to have a 0.4 effect size, that means it's useful. Not extremely useful, not less than useful, it's average. But this gives us a baseline. Any influence of learning that's less than 0.4 can be discouraged in our practices, and anything that receives higher than 0.4 can be encouraged and even used more frequently because it augments learning for our students. Are you with me so far? This took me a while, so don't worry about it. Just play back if you don't understand one of these concepts. Nobody's there looking, so play back as often as you want to. So the idea is that these effect sizes really help you, one, give you a background on why you're making certain choices and how you present information, and two, share with your students to empower them in their own learning. Knowledge is power. So I wanted to share this with you so you can share it with them, and everyone feels more powerful in their learning, all right? In the scaffold that you did, hopefully, I gave you the link to look at the 252 influences on learning that Hattie has analyzed. Here's a quick view of it. I really encourage you to look at more carefully this link because it really is fascinating. And many practices that we use in our learning environment that may be less effective, according to Hattie, we can stop using as often. And those that have a strong influence, according to this chart, we can use a lot more. I had to adjust things I was really surprised about. So, just keep note, because I'm going to ask you this later, which surprises you the most. So just a few seconds ago in the review of the last lesson, I used the term collective efficacy. If you've looked at Hattie's 252 educational practices, you'll have seen that collective efficacy has the highest influence on learning. Why? Because when the administration, the teachers, and the parents are all on the same page when it comes to methodology and the majority of other educational decisions, when the students walk in the doorway of the school, they can feel the collaboration and the appreciation each group feels towards the other. The end result is that the students learn more effectively. There's an incredible book on collective efficacy by Jenny and Marie Donahue that I would strongly recommend if you'd like to go deeper into this issue. So now that we've seen the highest influence on learning, let's look at just a couple of others. Feedback is another important practice that Hattie and his team analyzed. I would have thought that it has an even higher influence, but the idea is that if we don't get regular, and I mean daily, feedback on whether our students have assimilated new information or not, we as teachers can't really make informed decisions as to whether the next day we move ahead with a project or a lesson or a task or repeat it in another way. And 0.7 is really very high. And I always recommend to teachers that they need to give at least daily formative assessments to receive feedback and know what the students have learned or not, if not in every single session. Frequent is what I'm saying, frequent. And I'd also recommend a phenomenal book by Dylan William called Embedded Formative Assessments. It has tens of techniques, really concrete ones and very easy to implement for any different situation you have in your classroom. The third one I want to go over is behavior intervention, because that really is the crux of the matter for this lesson. It's 0.62. That is really high. As we said before, another way to say behavior intervention is to say that you have strong classroom management. You have a solid structure of norms and consequences. And when we're confident about having defined appropriate behavior, and above all, when our students have co-created and agreed to the norms of consequences, and they know that we're going to enforce them, they simply learn more effectively and fluidly. It's been proven. If you are constantly trying to keep your students on task and going home at the end of the day exhausted because most of your effort has been in classroom management, something is not in place. If your relationship with your students is contentious, they look at you aggressively, or the majority of your exchanges with them are conflictive or very inappropriate, neither you nor they are feeling secure in the learning environment, and learning is just not happening the way it could. Something needs to change. But no worries, that is exactly what this lesson is about. And we're going to do this by using positive reinforcement, which strengthens our affective domain to a whole new level. Just think, every time you would have said, no, don't do that, no, you can't, you're going to explain what they can do, what's appropriate to do, which is a whole different paradigm, and it is powerful. So, before we delve into these positive techniques, let's look at a few more educational practices and in a slightly different way. So these are only 12 of the 252 influences of learning that Hattie and his team have analyzed. Which have high influences of learning and which have low ones? What I'd like you to do is we're going to take a quick break here. Take 5 minutes and look at these 12. Give them a numerical order that you can justify. Don't worry what Hattie says. What do you think? Hattie and his team came up with their conclusions, and they can justify them, but you may have your own ideas of why you think one is stronger than another, and that's valid too. So you already have one of them, behavior intervention, 0.62. Do the rest have higher or lower influence of learning according to your experience and criteria? I am really looking forward to hearing what you decide. In the folder, you'll find the effect sizes given by Hattie and his team. Go ahead and do this activity, and then check what Hattie says. See you for the next part in just a few minutes.